This is Michael de Laine of the Copenhagen Voice at a press conference on low-carbon transport systems. With me is Yuki Tanaka, who is International Director of the Institution for Transport Policy Studies in Japan. And your institute has just published a report on how we can reduce CO2 emissions in transport. Can you briefly tell me what recommendations you have and what long-term views you have on this?
The recommendation to realize low-carbon transport system in the future is, first of all, the wide usage, active usage of public transport. So probably in developing countries, we need to introduce large-scale public transport infrastructure. And even if we introduce public transport, it is impossible to eliminate car traffic totally. So for that purpose, we also would like to seek the possibility of electric vehicles.
This will mean a greater generation of electricity, and that has hitherto been a carbon emitter. How will you get around this?
Well, the generation issue is a very difficult question to solve, but by introducing electric vehicles, I think we can reduce the distance of the car travel, because even in 2050, the driving distance with one charge of electricity is not very long, like 150 kilometers to 200 kilometers. So we think electric vehicles will be useful within urban area only. It's not suitable for intercity travel. So for intercity travel, people will choose other mode of transport. And by doing so, we can reduce long distance travel by car, and at the destination they can rent a car. And in total, we would like to reduce the car travel.
In a country like Denmark, where only 50% of the railway lines are electrified, would it make sense to electrify the rest, even at a high cost?
Well, you have to consider about the power source of the electricity in the first place, but by improving electrification of railways, it can reduce CO2 emission to the very large extent. So that's a very important issue, I think.
And in developing countries, I think you're right that they must expect to build 700,000 kilometers of railway lines in the next 40 years. That's quite a large task.
It seems very long distance, but take an example of China. They are building a massive amount of railway networks across the country, and they will do it by themselves. So if you think of the Chinese case, it's not really unrealistic scale. But at the same time, we also have to consider what is the best way to increase the railway infrastructure or to control traffic demand. So maybe that's the question of choice. But in order to cover the traffic demand, if we do not reduce the traffic demand, we need some sort of a way to carry out that demand. So for that purpose, we propose railway infrastructure, but maybe also there is a consideration that it's better to decrease traffic demand in the first place. So that's the question we have to consider.
But should developing the railway networks come before you cut traffic demand, or?
In both ways. The problem is today we didn't reduce. We showed the scenario without reducing traffic demand, because we thought that may affect the economic development. And so if we think a good way to reduce traffic demand without affecting economic demand and economic development, maybe that will be more cost effective than simply constructing railways. So we have to do both at the same time, finding a way to decouple economic development from transport demand and at the same time accommodate increasing traffic demand for their economic development.
Constructing railways is expensive, so how will these developing countries pay for that?
Well, for that purpose, we would like to emphasize the commitment of developed countries because they have a responsibility to reduce CO2 emissions as a whole. The responsibility is for developed countries, not for developing countries. That's the structure of the UNFCCC framework. So we would like to propose that developed countries should help developing countries if they want to construct railways in order to reduce CO2 emissions.
Again, coming back to Denmark, you're talking of concentrating both workplaces and homes in the larger cities. Today in Denmark, the east coast of Jutland and across the island of Fyn, across the island of Zealand, and particularly in Copenhagen, there are concentrations like this around the motorways, basically. Whereas down the west coast of Jutland, they have something called the Rotten Banana, which goes down the west coast across the bottom, where industrial businesses are just closing down, basically. If you're going to concentrate people on the east coast, and a lot of people living in the rural areas, farmers and so on, will still have transport needs, how will you solve that problem?
That's a very difficult issue. Well, if you want to introduce railway infrastructure, I think you need a certain transport density. Without that, the railway will be not cost effective. So for that purpose, it's a very difficult issue. We have the same problem in the United States as well. And if we really want to solve the problem, we have to consider about the structure of the city and where people live. So that's a very difficult issue, I have to confess.
Okay, your policy recommendations, you believe, will amount to how large a cut in CO2 emissions?
We can reduce CO2 emissions to the level of year 2000 as a whole in the global area from the transport sector.
And how much do you think that will cost?
It's really difficult to figure out the whole costs or every kind of thing. So what we did is only the railway construction part. We estimated how much it will cost to introduce railway infrastructure. Still, the amount is very expensive, particularly for developing countries. We figure out that we need over $6 trillion to introduce infrastructure.
That's quite a lot of money, but you think that the developed countries will be able to pay that, and they would be willing to pay that?
Well, the thing is, first of all, developed countries has a responsibility under the framework of UNFCCC, and at the same time, developed countries has already committed to help developing countries from the viewpoint of Development Aid Committee. We have a long-standing UN target to spend 0.7% of gross national income. So from that point of view, it is within the limit of the practicality.
But while some countries do spend 0.7%, other countries are way under that figure.
That's right.
So how will you encourage the poorer payers to pay up?
Well, that's the next issue we have to think about. The developed countries have already committed, but they don't fulfill the amount they should pay. So we have to find a better way to solve that problem. But what we can do today is to emphasize the responsibility of developed countries from the viewpoint of solving climate change issues.
This report is a global report, it's an interim report. Will there be a final report in the next few months?
It will be completed by the end of March next year, but We have both global studies and regional studies as well, and regional studies will come out at the end of March as well. So from April onwards, we are going to integrate the whole study.
Okay. Yuki, Tanaka, ITSP, thank you much indeed.
Thank you.